Oh, they've done it now, I mutter, nursing my 7th cup of Rigelian fire whiskey. The bar's ambient lighting flickers across my scaly blue skin as I watch the news broadcast with a mixture of horror and amusement. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ambassador Krell of the Zendari Confederation, and to says it may. I've spent the last 23 galactic cycles, about 50 of your Earth years, watching the so-called brightest minds of the Galactic Council make one stupid decision after another. But today they've outdone themselves. The holographic display shows Council President Glorbax, with his ridiculous ceremonial headpiece that makes him look like he's balancing a chandelier on his 3-lobed head, announcing what he calls protective measures against unchecked human expansion. Protective measures. Hey, as if anything could protect the galaxy from humans once they've been provoked. You see, I was there when we first encountered the humans. Back then, I thought, like the rest of the Council, that they were just another curious bipedal species with some interesting art and worrying tendencies toward violence. Primitive, but potentially useful. 50 years later, and I'm probably the only Council member who actually understands what we're dealing with. Humans don't think like us. When a Zendari faces an obstacle, we carefully analyze the situation, consider the political implications, form committees, and eventually develop a measured response. But when humans face an obstacle, they immediately start figuring out how to blow it up, go around it, or most terrifying of all, make friends with it. This quarantine will remain in effect until humanity demonstrates appropriate restraint and respect for galactic protocols, announces Glorbax, his voice dripping with self-importance. I drain my whiskey and signal the bartender, a 4-armed Pelaxian who's become used to my drinking habits whenever human matters are discussed. You know what happens when you corner a human, Bartok? I ask him as he slides another drink across the counter. No idea, Ambassador, he replies, his secondary arms already mixing another drink in anticipation. Neither does the Council, I snort, and that's exactly the problem. Tomorrow I'll have to send my official report to the Zendari homeworld. It'll be the shortest report of my career. The Galactic Council has just declared war on humanity without having the common sense to call it war. Recommend immediate preparation for significant economic and political restructuring. Also recommend stocking up on human whiskey before supplies are affected. They're going to need it. I raise my glass to the holographic image of Earth, now displayed on the screen, a swirling blue marble that somehow produced the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. Congratulations, Council, I say to no one in particular. You just woke the sleeping giant, and unlike the rest of you pompous fools, I've seen what happens next. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, trying not to roll all 4 of my eyes as President Glorbax preened at the central podium. The council chambers, designed to intimidate with soaring crystal columns and hovering observation platforms, were packed with representatives from over 200 species. The emergency session had been called with almost no notice, which should have been my first clue that something monumentally stupid was about to happen. Esteemed colleagues, Glorbax began, his voice booming through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers. His ceremonial robes shimmered with iridescent patterns that were probably meant to hypnotize more susceptible species into agreement. The 3 fleshy lobes atop his head pulsated with what he thought was gravitas, but really just made him look like he was suffering from some exotic allergic reaction. We face an unprecedented threat to galactic stability, he continued, pausing dramatically to let his head lobes flash a concerned purple. The human expansion has exceeded all projected parameters. I checked the data on my tablet. Humans had established 17 colonies beyond their solar system in the last decade. 17. The Prixian Empire had 43. But nobody was calling emergency sessions about them. Ambassador Krell, Glorbax said, apparently noticing my less than rapt attention. You've dealt extensively with the humans. Would you care to share your insights? Perfect. A chance to inject some sanity into the proceedings. Certainly, President Glorbax, I said, rising from my seat. While humans have indeed expanded rapidly, their colonies are remarkably efficient and sustainable. Their technology-sharing programs have benefited 63 council species, including the Meldorians, who were facing extinction before human agricultural techniques saved their homeworld. I cleared my throat. If I may speak plainly, restricting human expansion would be inadvisable. Grand Minister Voon of the Trill hierarchy fluttered her wing membranes in obvious disdain. Inadvisable? They've developed faster-than-light communications that bypass our regulated channels. Their ships now travel at speeds our monitoring stations can barely track. Precisely my point, I replied. Humans innovate when challenged. If the Council imposes restrictions, they won't simply accept them. They'll find alternatives, possibly less transparent alternatives. Security Director Pax, Nor, a hulking Dravidi with a natural armor plating that made him look perpetually constipated, snorted loudly. Are you suggesting humans would defy Council directives? I'm suggesting that humans don't recognize impossibility the way other species do, I said carefully. They see restrictions as puzzles, not barriers. Glorbax's head lobes darkened to a dismissive maroon. Thank you, Ambassador. Your concerns are noted. That's Council speak for shut up. We're ignoring you. The vote was swift and depressingly predictable. Out of 216 voting members, only 12 voted against quarantine measures. The official language was bureaucratically bland, temporary restrictions on human expansion pending review of compliance with Council safety protocols. What it actually meant was, we're scared of humans and want to put them back in their box. As the session ended, I found myself standing next to Ambassador T. Krell of the Andovian meritocracy, one of the few who had voted with me. This will end badly, she whispered, her liquid voice barely audible. No, I replied, gathering my materials. This will end catastrophically. The Council just challenged humans to a game of strategy while simultaneously announcing our first move and revealing that we're terrified of them. Walking out of the chambers, I mentally calculated how quickly I could relocate my most valuable assets to human-controlled space. I figured I had about a week before everything went spectacularly sideways. I was being optimistic, as it turned out. The next day, the Council chamber was notably quieter as Ambassador Tessa Bailey of Earth took the floor. Unlike yesterday's circus, today only the Executive Committee and relevant ambassadors were present. Bailey stood before us, poised and collected in her simple blue uniform. No flashy regalia, no ceremonial headgear, just a small pin representing Earth and its colonies. What struck me most was her calm. Humans are famous for their emotional outbursts, their passion, their righteous anger. I'd expected shouting, threats, perhaps even the diplomatic equivalent of table flipping. Instead, Bailey spoke with measured precision that sent chills down all 3 segments of my spine. The United Earth Federation acknowledges the Council's decision, she said, her voice steady as a quantum stabilizer. While we disagree with both the assessment and the conclusion, we recognize the Council's authority in this matter. President Glorbax's head lobes pulsated with smug satisfaction. Rule. However, Bailey continued, I am instructed to inform the Council that restricting human movement will have unforeseen consequences. Not threats, simply inevitabilities. When pressure builds in a closed system, release will eventually occur. We would prefer controlled decompression to catastrophic rupture. Her smile never wavered. Not once. Security Director Pax, nor leaned forward. Is that a threat, Ambassador Bailey? Not at all, Director. It's physics. Her smile widened just a fraction. We'll comply with your directive, effective immediately. Good day. And she left. No drama, no pleading, no negotiation. Later that evening, I found myself back at Bartok's establishment, this time accompanied by a small group of minor diplomats. The Council's decision was the only topic anyone could discuss. Humans aren't so special, slurred diplomat Zell of the Promethe cluster, her gelatinous form wobbling with each word. They've only been spacefaring for what, a century? The Dravidi have been traveling between stars for millennia. And yet, I replied, humans went from atmospheric flight to landing on their moon in 66 years. From their first space station to their first extrasolar colony in less than a century. Ambassador Glix, a spindly arachnoid, clicked his mandibles nervously. I heard their neural networks can interface directly with quantum computers. Nonsense, snorted Trade Minister Boru, his massive frame barely contained by the reinforced stool beneath him. Council intelligence would know if. He was interrupted by a priority alert blaring from everyone's communicators simultaneously. I activated the holographic display above our table, and we all stared at the emergency bulletin. Attention all council members and diplomatic personnel. Multiple human vessels have failed to report at designated checkpoints. Current whereabouts unknown. This is a tracking anomaly, not cause for alarm. Repeat, not cause for alarm. The bar fell silent. Then Glix whispered what we were all thinking. That's a lot of ships to lose track of at once. I drained my drink and stood up. Ministers, ambassadors, it's been a pleasure. I suggest you all contact your governments immediately. The humans aren't coming to negotiate. They already know exactly what they're going to do. As I walked out, my communicator pinged with a private message. Unknown sender, but the content was unmistakably human in its brevity. Pressure's dropping, Ambassador Krell. Might want to grab a handle. The first week of the human quarantine passed with suspicious tranquility. Council security vessels arrived at human outposts throughout the Orion Arm to enforce the new restrictions, only to find many of them conveniently empty. Mining stations, research outposts, agricultural colonies all abandoned with almost surgical precision. Equipment removed, data cores wiped, not so much as a coffee mug left behind. They just left? I asked, reviewing the reports at the emergency session. Security Director Pax Nor's natural armor plates clicked against each other as he paced a Dravidi sign of extreme agitation. Impossible. They couldn't have known about our decision before we made it. I bit back the obvious retort, that perhaps humans were simply more intelligent than the walking tank currently wearing a path in the council chamber floor. Instead, I offered the diplomatic version. Perhaps they observed the political trends and made preparations accordingly. Pax Nor glared at me with all three of his targeting eyes. Are you suggesting humans have infiltrated council deliberations? I'm suggesting, I said carefully, that humans are very good at pattern recognition. By the second week, Pax Nor had stationed security teams at every major council facility. The random identity checks tripled. Diplomatic pouches were scanned. The Dravidi had gone from confident to paranoid faster than a Zendalian humming beast changes direction. It was around this time that I received a curious invitation to meet at a warehouse in the lower markets, hardly a typical diplomatic venue. My security instincts told me to decline. My curiosity won out. The cavernous space was filled with shipping containers and smelled of exotic spices and machine oil. A human male appeared from between two tall crates, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in dangerous places. Ambassador Krell, he said, extending a hand in the human greeting custom. Jackson Reed. Thanks for coming. I shook his hand cautiously. You're not with the human diplomatic corps. Reed laughed, the sound echoing off the metal containers. Not exactly. Let's say I facilitate alternative trade routes for specialty goods. A smuggler, I translated. Such an ugly word, he smiled, leading me deeper into the warehouse. I prefer logistics specialist for politically complicated merchandise. We stopped at a container marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Reed pressed his palm against a hidden scanner, and the side panel slid open to reveal nothing. It was empty. Fascinating, I said dryly. You've brought me to see an empty box." 3 weeks ago, Reed said, ignoring my sarcasm, this container held prototype gravity manipulators for 20 colony ships that were never officially registered with the Council. I felt my scales tighten against my body. "How many?" Reed's expression turned serious. "Krell, humans have been preparing for this scenario for over 30 years. Ever since the Council restricted the Tellarite expansion and watched their civilization collapse." He gestured around the warehouse. "This is just one of 200 similar facilities across Council space. We've been moving equipment, people, and technology through alternative channels while smiling at Council inspectors." "Why tell me this?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because you're one of the few who voted against the quarantine. And because you understand humans better than most." Reed handed me a small data crystal. "This contains safe coordinates, places the Council fleet won't be." I stared at the crystal. "Won't be? Or won't exist?" Reed just smiled. "Let's just say Director Pax, Nor is about to have a very bad day." He wasn't exaggerating. 3 hours later, alarms blared across the central spire as reports flooded in from the Arcturus shipyards, the Council's primary military construction facility. Somehow, despite Pax Nor's increased security, human stealth operatives had infiltrated the shipyards and sabotaged the primary production facilities. 50 capital ships under construction rendered into very expensive, very useless hunks of metal. The Council chamber erupted into chaos as the holographic displays showed the damage. Smoke billowed from multiple construction bays. Emergency vessels darted between the structures like panicked insects. "How?" roared Glorbax, his head lobes almost black with rage. "How did they get past our security?" I didn't mention the human maintenance workers who had been quietly servicing Council facilities for decades. I didn't point out that humans had been designing our security systems for the last 15 years because they were so good with technology. And I certainly didn't mention Jackson Reed's parting words. "This isn't even the main event, Ambassador. It's just the opening act." By the 3rd week, I had relocated to a modest apartment in the outer ring of Council Station, less prestigious than my official residence, but with the distinct advantage of being nowhere near the central spire when everything inevitably went to hell. From my new vantage point, I watched as Council propaganda broadcasts assured everyone that the human situation was under control. Meanwhile, military vessels were being repositioned around key Council facilities faster than a politician changes positions during an election cycle. It was on the 23rd day of the quarantine that my emergency comms unit activated with an unexpected broadcast. Every screen in Council space probably received the same signal, overriding the official channels with ridiculous ease. The image showed a human woman in a crisp naval uniform, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, dark skin contrasting with the white of her collar. Her eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is Admiral Lakshmi Patel of the United Earth Federation Navy," she announced, her voice carrying that peculiar human blend of formality and unmistakable threat. "To the Galactic Council and all citizens of Council space, the quarantine imposed upon humanity ends today." I poured myself a drink. This was going to be good. For 50 years, humanity has contributed to galactic prosperity. We have shared technology, provided humanitarian aid, and respected the Council's authority. In return, we were labeled dangerous and subjected to restrictions reminiscent of those that caused the extinction of the Tellarites. She paused, allowing that comparison to sink in. Very effective. We will not suffer the same fate. As of this transmission, human forces have positioned themselves throughout Council space. We do not seek war, but we will not accept imprisonment. The view shifted to show something that made me nearly drop my glass. A massive human fleet, emerging from nowhere. One moment there was empty space. The next, over 300 vessels of unfamiliar design appeared near the Arcturus hub, the central nexus of Council communications and defense networks. Sweet mother of egg clutches, I muttered. The Council's defense grid activated immediately, of course. Automated defense platforms swiveled toward the human fleet, their weapon systems charging and then shutting down. Every single one. The supposedly impenetrable Council defense network designed by the finest military minds in the galaxy just switched itself off. Admiral Patel continued, now addressing her own forces. Soldiers, sailors, and citizens of Earth, this is not a war of conquest. This is a defense of our fundamental right to exist as equals in this galaxy. Engage only hostile targets. Minimize casualties. Remember, we are fighting for our place among the stars, not to destroy our neighbors. Within hours, reports flooded in from across Council space. Human military doctrine was nothing like the standard Council tactics of overwhelming force concentration. Their ships moved in unpredictable patterns, using what seemed like unnecessarily complex formations until you realized they were impossible to counter effectively. They struck simultaneously at multiple locations, prioritizing communication nodes and defensive installations while conspicuously avoiding civilian targets. From my apartment, I watched the tactical displays with a mixture of horror and admiration. The Dravidi 6th Fleet Pride of Director Pax, Nor's defense forces attempted to engage the human vessels near the Proxima relay station. The Dravidi, with their heavily armored dreadnoughts, expected to simply power through the smaller human vessels. What they didn't expect was for the humans to completely ignore conventional space combat protocols. Human ships deliberately flew into the Dravidi formation, executing maneuvers at suicidally close ranges. They didn't fire their weapons in coordinated volleys, but instead seemed to target specific systems with surgical precision. 6 hours later, the Dravidi 6th Fleet was effectively neutralized, not destroyed, but left drifting with disabled engines and weapons. The human casualties appeared minimal. My secure terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Jackson Reed. Enjoying the show, Ambassador? Admiral Patel sends her regards. She mentioned you were one of the few who understood what the Council was walking into. I typed back, where did those ships come from? Our sensors would have detected construction of that scale. The response came quickly. Remember all those abandoned mining operations? Turns out hollowed-out asteroids make excellent shipyards when you don't want nosy Council inspectors finding them. I laughed despite myself. The Council had spent decades worrying about human weapons while completely missing the actual threat: human ingenuity. Another alert sounded the Council's central defense AI had just been completely bypassed. Security protocols that would have taken other species decades to crack were unraveled in hours. And the most hilarious part: the Council members had no idea their supposedly secure communications were now being broadcast across public channels. How did they manage to disable our security so completely? I asked Reed. His answer was delightfully simple. We designed most of it. 3 days after the human fleet's dramatic appearance, I found myself back in the Grand Chamber for what the official summons called an emergency reconciliation session. A more accurate description would have been watching the Council grovel for mercy. The chamber had been rearranged. Admiral Patel now occupied the central podium, with Ambassador Bailey at her side. President Glorbax and his executive committee were seated below them, like chastised schoolchildren. His ceremonial headpiece was noticeably absent, his head lobes a pale, defeated beige. This emergency session of the Galactic Council will now commence, announced the chamber AI, its neutral voice somehow still conveying the gravity of the situation. Admiral Patel wasted no time on ceremony. The United Earth Federation presents the following terms. First, immediate cessation of all quarantine measures against human worlds and vessels. Second, reparations for economic damage caused by said quarantine. Third, human representation on all Council executive committees proportional to our technological and economic contributions. Security Director Pax, Nor, his armor plates scratched and dented from some recent disagreement, rose to object. The Council cannot possibly. Fourth, interrupted Ambassador Bailey with a pleasant smile, the immediate resignation of Security Director Pax, Noor and his entire command staff. Pax Noor's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. I had to suppress a laugh. He looked exactly like a Terran goldfish. These terms are outrageous. Glorbax finally sputtered, his lobes flashing a weak orange. The Council has stood for 10,000 years. We cannot simply reorganize based on the demands of. Actually, came a voice from the viewing gallery, we can and we will. Every head turned to see Ambassador Nix of the Palaxian Domains, one of the Council's oldest members, standing alongside representatives from at least 30 other species. The Palaxians support humanity's terms, Nix announced, as do the Endovians, the Rylari Conclave, the Zindari Confederation, and many others. Glorbax's lobes went almost white. This is treason. No, replied Nix calmly. This is long overdue correction. For centuries, the Council has systematically marginalized younger species and smaller civilizations. The humans are merely the first to successfully challenge this system. I couldn't contain myself any longer. Standing up from my seat, I addressed the chamber. The Zindari Confederation fully endorses this position. I tried to warn this council about underestimating humanity. I explained that restricting their expansion would only provoke innovation. But the council, in its infinite arrogance, believed that traditions and protocols would triumph over adaptability and determination. I pointed directly at Glorbax. You were so concerned with maintaining the existing power structure that you failed to recognize when that structure became obsolete. The chamber erupted into a mixture of outrage and support. Through the chaos, I watched Admiral Patel, observing with calm satisfaction. She caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of appreciation. When order was finally restored, the voting began. The resulting tally shocked even me. 142 species in favor of accepting human terms, 74 against. The old guard had lost their iron grip on the council. What followed was a flurry of reorganization that would have been impossible only days before. Humans took charge of technological development and defense committees. The formerly marginalized species found themselves with actual voting power. Even the chamber itself was being redesigned to eliminate the hierarchical seating that had symbolized council stratification for millennia. Grand Minister Voon, who had been so dismissive of humans during the quarantine vote, approached me after the session. Her wing membranes drooped in dejection. How could we have misunderstood them so completely? She asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. I couldn't resist a final barb. Perhaps next time, before deciding a species is dangerous, you might ask yourself, dangerous to whom? To everyone? Or just to those who stand in their way? As we filed out of the chamber, Ambassador Bailey caught up with me. Ambassador Krell, Admiral Patel would like to offer you a position on the new Joint Security Council. Why me? I asked, genuinely surprised. Her smile was knowing. Because you understand that the most dangerous thing about humans isn't our weapons or our technology. It's your absolute refusal to accept limitations, I finished for her. Exactly, and we value those who recognize that quality rather than fear it. I accepted, of course. After all, if there's one thing I've learned in my long diplomatic career, it's this. When humans reshape the galaxy, you want to be on their side of the renovation. Another round, Ambassador? Bartok asks, polishing a glass with one pair of arms while mixing drinks with another. Why not? I reply, pushing my empty glass forward. We're celebrating, after all. 1 year since the reorganization, as it's now diplomatically called. 1 year since humans went from quarantine troublemakers to the driving force of galactic politics. My new office overlooks the renovated Council Plaza, where species that barely acknowledged each other now collaborate on everything from trade agreements to terraforming projects. The changes have been substantial. Travel time between sectors has decreased by 60% thanks to human hyperspace lane redesigns. Disease outbreaks that once devastated entire planets are now contained within days. Even the notoriously bureaucratic permit system that used to take decades has been streamlined to mere weeks. Turns out when you stop trying to preserve a 10,000-year-old power structure and start focusing on actual problems, things improve dramatically. Who would have thought? To the humans, I toast, raising my glass to a passing Earth diplomatic team. May they never stop being gloriously, terrifyingly efficient. The most delicious irony? Glorbax now serves as a cultural advisor to the human delegation, a polite title for living example of how not to govern. His ceremonial headpiece sits in a museum display titled Artifacts of the Former Hierarchy. Last I heard, his head lobes have never quite recovered their vibrant colors. So, dear reader, yes, you, the representative of the newly discovered Vexillion hive who's been assigned this report, let me offer some advice as you prepare for your first contact with humans. Do not make the same mistake we did. Do not look at their shorter lifespans and assume they lack perspective. Do not observe their divisive internal politics and assume they cannot unite with terrifying speed when threatened. And most importantly, do not attempt to contain them. The Council tried to put humanity in a box, only to discover that humans are particularly good at thinking outside of boxes. In fact, they're particularly good at taking those boxes apart, rebuilding them into something entirely different, and then selling the improved design back to you at a reasonable markup. The quarantine wasn't a cage for humanity. It was merely the key that unlocked their cage. And now they're everywhere, improving everything, asking questions nobody thought to ask for millennia, and generally making the rest of us wonder what we've been doing with our time. So welcome to the galaxy, Vexillions. It's under new management and business is booming. Just remember, the species that looks like they're making things up as they go along, they're exactly the ones you should worry about. Because somehow, impossibly, that approach works spectacularly well for them. Trust me, I've got the bar tab to prove it.